Over the last 2 years, as I've served as president over the last 2 years, we've had a lot of very distinguished speakers, and I've tried to be as dispassionate in introducing them as possible, even though some of them were my friends. I probably will not be as dispassionate this morning because Dan was, as I think many of you know, my business partner for 7 years and a very good friend, and so I probably will be less dispassionate than I normally am. Dan joined Carlyle in 2003 and rose up to be the head of our global buyout business, which is our most important business, and was a member of our management committee and really provided enormous value to Carlyle and really helped it grow to the point where it is today. So when Dan told me that he was going to be the CEO of General Motors, I was not happy, honestly. And I said, "Do you know how much money you're leaving on the table?" And he said he did, and I said, "Okay, does your wife know how much money you're leaving on the table?" And then I said, "Well, okay, maybe she does, but do your children know how much money you're leaving on the table?" I honestly think, as you'll hear, Dan did this out of a sense of patriotism to really help the U.S. government get its money back and do other things for an iconic company. And I doubt that there are very many people that I'm aware of who have made as big a financial sacrifice as Dan did to help serve his country. We've never disclosed it, and I'm not going to disclose today, but it's an extraordinary amount of money that Dan basically just walked away from. And I applaud him as an American taxpayer, but it was a lot of money. Money isn't everything, but Dan began life in Minnesota. He went to the Naval Academy, graduated in class in 1970. Subsequently served in the Navy for 5 years, and then when he left the Navy, he went to work in the petroleum industry and actually in England, and there he got a master's degree at the London School of Economics, returned to the United States to work for 5 years at AT&T, and then he joined a little company called MCI. He became the head of the Southeast Division, and then when Carlyle was started, I recruited the CFO of MCI, Bill Conway, to join Carlyle in 1987, and Dan replaced Bill as the CFO and moved to Washington and ultimately rose up to be the president and chief operating officer of MCI. He was recruited away to be a partner at Forsman Little in New York, at a leveraged buyout by a private equity firm, and very shortly thereafter he became the CEO of one of its portfolio companies, General Instruments, replacing Don Rumsfeld as the CEO, incidentally. He then did that for a number of years. It was successfully sold. Then he became the CEO of Nextel and transformed that company by increasing revenues by about 25 times during the short period of time that he was there. He then became the CEO of XO, and in that capacity served in effect as his fourth company that he had run as a CEO. Dan then left that and joined Carlyle, as I mentioned, in 2003. And when he left Carlyle to become the CEO of General Motors, I knew it was a daunting task, and he did an extraordinarily great job from the time he took over. He was elected to the CEO position on August 11th of this year, and of course they've completed the largest IPO in history, and I doubt that there's anybody that I'm aware of who single-handedly has put as much money in the coffers of the U.S. government in as short a period of time as Dan did. As a result of that IPO, the U.S. government has been repaid $23 billion, and so I refer to Dan now as our $23 billion man. Extraordinary tenure in just a short period of time that Dan has in his short tenure, I should say, Dan has shown his extraordinary skills as an executive and as a CEO, and I doubt that IPO could have been done in as short a period of time unless Dan was there to really shepherd it through. So already in a very short period of time, he's shown the extraordinary skills that I saw at Carlyle, and we're very pleased that both Dan is here today, and I think as a taxpayer, we're very pleased that he's now the CEO of General Motors. Dan Akerson.
I had a thought while David was speaking. Karin, I want you to remember this. When I meet my ultimate reward, invite David to the funeral. This is really a pleasure and an honor to be here today. And it's hard to be unemotional about today. There are so many of my friends here, and I have deep ties into this community, having served in various positions at MCI, which was at the fountainhead of many of the changes that you see from a technology point of view here and worldwide. My friends from Nextel. We had a mini American Express board meeting with Ted Leonsis and Vernon Jordan earlier. Steve Case and Gene Case from AOL and all the folks from AOL. I was on the board at AOL, Time Warner, for many years. And of course the Carlyle Group, which is great, and my personal friends. Two of the gentlemen I know for 20 years I play squash with routinely, and I might add, routinely beat. And of course, my college roommates here, Jim Perry, who is a dear friend of, he knew me when I had hair, and which even my wife can't say. And Jim and I roomed together for 3.5 years at the United States Naval Academy. And of course, my wife, who I couldn't have embarked on this adventure without her. How many veterans are there in the group? Would you raise your hands? Thank you for your service. And thank you, David, for the kind introduction. It's great to be here. I flew in last night, and yes, I did fly commercial. I'm not that dumb. I did the whole airport thing. I actually chose the enhanced pat down of the entire body. And I told the TS agent, take your best shot, big guy, I've been through it. The roadshow was an experience on many different levels, but it was worth it. 18 months ago, GM was pretty much flat on its back. In June of '09, we filed for bankruptcy protection. That's kind of old news now, but if you would just think about it for a moment. General Motors, the icon of American manufacturing, one time the holder of 50% of the U.S. vehicle market, standard bearer of what was termed the modern corporation, and it went bankrupt. It was unimaginable until it actually happened. 39 days later, thanks to help from the U.S. taxpayer and others, GM was relaunched. Critics gave us very little chance of success. Many thought we would remain on the public dole for decades. Others simply left us for dead. But 16 months later, after emerging from bankruptcy, this new GM was relaunched in one of the most, if not the most successful, initial public offering ever. I spent many decades in business, most recently in private equity. It was my job, in a sense, to assess companies, their jobs, their prospects, their managements, and essentially make bets on their futures. I can promise you that 2 years ago, there was precious few in this country that gave GM a chance or were willing to bet on its future. But 3 weeks ago, people by the hundreds of thousands did just that. They bet on General Motors. They saw a company with a new business model focused on solely 3 things: designing, building, and selling the world's best vehicles. They saw a new company with a competitive cost structure, improved capacity utilization, leaner inventories, improved brand equity, and customers willing to pay higher prices for great vehicles, all of which result in improved earnings and great cash flow. They saw an automotive company competing in a growth business, hard to imagine not too many years ago, one that was better positioned than any other company in the world in the emerging markets of India, China, and Brazil. They saw a new company with a strong balance sheet and plans to make it even stronger. They saw a new company positioned to break even at the bottom of the market. Actually, '09 was a 50-year low for the automotive industry in this country, in this region, and we actually made money. Heretofore, the company would break even at mid-cycle, and they would only make money at the high end of the cycle. If we achieve a mid-cycle correction in the next year, GM is very well positioned to move forward. The new investors saw a company being managed by a mix of new talent that was intent on change and a team of highly skilled insiders who are running key operations around the world. And most importantly, they saw great new products in the marketplace, like the Cadillac SRX, which took 9 market share points in 1 year. Buick LaCrosse. Buick is the fastest selling brand in America in the past 12 months. The GM Terrain and the Chevy Cruze, which is in 80 countries now. We introduced it here. It's either number 1 or 2 in each of the countries that it is currently manufactured in, and is the first really strong eco subcompact compact that we've produced in this country. They also saw a company that today with 4 brands is selling more than it did a year ago with 8 brands. And finally, they saw a lot of people beginning to believe in the new GM, a company that has learned from its past and is committed and determined not to make the mistakes of the past. At GM, we're building a culture that values speed, agility, and competitiveness, and that continually and will continually adapt its business model to the rapidly changing world, and that puts the customer first. This may not seem revolutionary to you, but trust me, it is. What does this mean? It means that we're working hard to set the pace with new cars like the Chevy Cruze. The Cruze was recently named 2001 Urban Car of the Year by Decisive Media. It's in a segment, it's a segment leader. It features things that we're going to start to differentiate on. 10 airbags. Its competition has 8. We have OnStar. We intend to make OnStar in every car on the road essentially a network node. You'll see dramatic changes in the internet application to automotive and automotive safety. It means we're bringing customers the newest design and technology like Volt, the extended range electric vehicle. Volt is like no other car on the road today, none. By the way, there'll be 4 of them upstairs for you all to see. And anyone who would like to drive, it's only $25 for a trip around the block. We're trying to raise more revenue at every opportunity. This car will go 50 miles on a single charge, and then it converts to a generator, an 86 horsepower combustion engine, and it'll go another 300 miles. You can literally drive this car from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles. Not to say that we won't develop other cars like the Leaf. Those are battery electric cars. We think they have a place in the marketplace, but we think they'll be more of a metro car. Yes, Steve, we'll sell them to the ZIP if you would like to have some. From the start, the Volt was designed to change the way that we think about the automobile, and I think we've made a strong statement in that area. Just in 2011, the accolades have been many and wide. Car of the Year award by Automobile Magazine, Motor Trend. I might also note, we were also named to have the Truck of the Year. That's very rare for an automotive company to have both Car and Truck of the Year by Motor Trend. The Volt was also named Car of the Year by Green Car Journal, as well as top honors from Car and Driver and popular mechanics. We're confident that the Volt will be one of the most important cars that GM's ever produced. In fact, when I think back over many people's lives in this room, the iconic car might have been described as the 64-65 Mustang. I think in 2020 and 2030, I hope my children will reflect back that the Volt was the iconic car of their generation. I might also note that one of the launch markets for the Volt will be Washington, D.C. There are 7. We intend to start shipping Volts next week for commercial purchases. The Volt also is a statement that we are thinking globally as well as acting in what we believe to be society's best interest. Last month we announced that Chevrolet will invest $40 million over the next few years for various clean energy projects throughout America. Why $40 million? These projects are designed to reduce about 8 million metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions in the United States. That's roughly the carbon imprint or footprint emitted from all Chevrolets that will be sold between now and the end of 2011. And we wanted to make a strong statement that we're just not out for a fast buck or to sell cars, but we want to be a responsible member of our society. This is a big and important goal and one we're committed to achieve. We think it's the right thing to do for our customers, our company, and for the communities that we live in. It's all part of GM's commitment to the environment and to a clean energy future. To be fair, and I appreciate all your kind words, David, this is not the result of me. I'm a member of the team. Many of these projects were started well before the bankruptcy, and I think we have to give due credit and gratitude to the people that had the foresight at General Motors to develop these great cars and trucks that are now winning so many awards. And I think it is testimony to the tenacity and the persistence and the focus of the GM employees to look through the dark days of the bankruptcy, the days leading up to the bankruptcy, and kept focused to deliver great products. There was a lot of turmoil around the company, around the industry, and it was most impressive, and it is the source of inspiration to me personally, and it's a privilege as much as anything to lead such a great team of people that are so committed to doing what's right for their company and, in a sense, for their country. In many ways, what it comes down to in the future to get people like you, and I view everyone in this room as a potential GM customer. That's why I'm here today. But we have to rebuild the trust in the General Motors product line. And it took many years of really not listening to our customer base and arguably poor quality to destroy what once was a great image. Well, I will tell you today that our quality is second to none. There's no foreign transplant, there's no foreign competitor that produces cars any better than we do. These are world-class cars. That's been verified not only from internal but external metrics. So I'm proud to be a team leader of a great company with great products. And I hope you will reconsider or consider your next purchase, 4 of which will be upstairs following the meeting. GM is a company, and as we went through the IPO and we knew we were going to have a special offering, everything from the press release, and I hope you saw in our public statements, the humility we wanted to project. We survived a near-death experience, and we deeply appreciate the support we got from the American people on a state and federal level, and we will not forget that. For the first time in a generation, and I am not kidding, this was a company that had many structural cost problems. Post-retirement health care, job banks, the list goes on and on. That has all been rectified. In fact, for the first time, we have a level playing field. So as we said in one of our earlier lines, advertising lines, may the best car win. And if that's the metric by which we are measured, I am confident of our future. So we look forward to re-earning the public's trust and respect every day. We look forward to a bright future. And with that, David, I'd like to turn it back to you, because I know you want to ask me a lot of questions. But
So I understand you drove over in a Volt today. So just between us, what was it like?
ecstasy. You know, it's interesting. I've only had my life threatened twice so far, so I actually have security now, which is something new for me. I always felt secure with you, though, David.
Right.
He drove the car, because usually I drive in a SUV, but I wanted to drive the car here in case anybody wanted to take us up in the $25 on the block. But he was impressed. I mean, this guy drives professionally, and he was, it's tight, it's got, I mean, it's just not the propulsion system. What does it look like? I know I'm going to offend a lot of you Toyota, but we commonly refer to the Geekmobile as the Prius. I mean, I wouldn't be caught dead in a Prius. But this actually looks good, and I've driven it 500 miles. My wife's here, she'll attest to it. We've used 1.2 gallons of gas.
Really?
Yeah. So, and 80% of the people in America drive 40 miles or less per day. 40 miles or less per day. So you should be able to drive, the average 80% of us should be able to drive without ever, like if I were working at Carlisle,
right,
down 10 miles back home, I'd
so
never be able to fill it up.
it's going to be for sale as of, what, 2 weeks from now? Or?
We've already got 200,000 orders. So now, a lot of people, when they show up, may not want to fork over that much money. You know, this is another thing about the Volt, and there aren't going to be that many available this year, probably 20, 25,000 nationally. We liquid cool the battery pack. The battery pack weighs 400 pounds. And many of the battery electric vehicles will be air-cooled. And we are forefront in the technology. We spend $7 billion a year in research and development. We're a true repository of technology. We put another $7 billion in engineering. And the air-cooled battery pack is estimated to last 3 to 5 years. That's a $15,000 replacement cost. Right. So we've guaranteed the battery pack on the Volt for 8 years or 100,000 miles. So we know the residual of this car will be good at the end of 3 years, the total cost of a car over a 3-year period. And when we come out with a battery electric, that could be a problem to residuals. This would be something to be factored into the economics.
So when you are here, whenever you are on the weekends, what car are you driving?
I'm driving the Volt right now. Wait till you see the new Camaro coming out. I know this sounds like an advertisement, but the new Camaro convertible. You're going to love that car too, and it's been a great seller. But we're going to put it in a soft top starting January.
So
get that this summer.
Why exactly did you walk away from a lot of money that would have helped your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren? What was really the motivation, if you could articulate that?
Well, I know, and I was asked that question last week when we rolled out the Volt by a Fox reporter. I doubt if they showed this on television, but he said, he was quoting you. I think you've said this in several forums. In fact, I know you told Larry Summers because he mentioned the specific number.
Well, he was staggered when I told it to him.
Are you recruiting him to? Anyway.
Today's his last day on the job, but.
I know. There's more to life than money. I wasn't put on this earth to just make money. I can't tell you, in my lifetime, there have been iconic events. When I got married, my children, my grandchildren. when I walked on the trading floor, once the deal was done, there were people, there must have been 400 people, and they just stood up and they clapped. One of the traders on the floor told me when they had to delist General Motors, he cried. And when they relisted General Motors, he cried. And when I went back to Detroit, there was an employee meeting of 2,000 people. And there was a man my age, and he cried. And he said, 18 months ago, I thought this company was gone. My house was gone. So it's hard to describe. And in those experiences, no offense to Carlisle, it is a wonderful place. It's a great people. But I know I made the right decision. Well, because this company, quite frankly, is too important to fail. The American industrial infrastructure is too important to let go down. And I will tell you the implications here, and I'll leave it to other people to argue about it. Had General Motors gone down, we spend $80 billion a year in our supply chain. Ford wasn't in that good a shape 2 years ago, and I'm not going to say they would have gone down, but if our supply chain would have gone down, I think that would have caused huge disruptions for everybody. And I don't know what the cost would have been of another 1 million people unemployed in this country, but it would have been a lot more than a lot of people have projected, in my opinion. So sometimes you have to do what has to be done, and I'm not that special, but someone had to stand up.
Well, Dan, when you did the IPO and you went around the world, what were the impressions that you got around the world? What do you think made the stock sell so well? Really, you were originally going to price it at I think in the mid-20s or so.
26 to 29.
And it priced at $33. So obviously it was great demand, and you increased the offering size. So what would you say the one or two main factors that propelled the interest?
Well, the fact that we have a great contract with the union and the substance and form of a competitive cost structure here in North America. But what really, I thought, intrigued and surprised me when I went on the board in July of 2009, was the market position. We will produce almost as many cars in China this year as we will in the United States. And we are continually gaining market share. We have a most enviable position in China. And when we talked about our plans, for example, we all live here, and believe me, if you think about this, we don't as Americans because we view it as kind of a homogeneous country. It's not. When I was at MCI, for example, we would not run the same ads in Birmingham, Alabama as we would in Brooklyn. Joan Rivers didn't sell well in Birmingham. And so there are different regions as you think about it. I mean, California is kind of a culture of its own, and so is Alabama, and so is Minnesota. So is China. We look at China in 4 different ways. Big cities, Shanghai, Beijing, Hong Kong, and then we look at but if you look out in the western provinces, we're going to produce a new car called Baojun this year. And it wouldn't sell in any industrial market because we've got to sell it for down in the $5,000 range. And you can imagine, for example, Easy doesn't have electric windows. You have roll windows. That would freak all of us out. It might hurt my wrist. But anyway, so we not only sell upmarket, but we're going to sell down market. Chevrolet is our global brand. I will tell you, I looked at a Chevrolet. I was at our design and tech center the other day. We have a new Chevrolet that's going to come out. If you looked at it, it looks like a BMW, only it's American, and it cost half as much. And when we asked in a blind, we stacked all the cars in that sector up against the Chevrolet, and we were right in the middle from a price point. And we asked people to take those same cars. They drove them all. They didn't know who made them. They put that car that they didn't know was a Chevrolet here, BMW here. I mean, this went right down the line. this car, there are new cars coming, new models that will, I think, stand us in very good stead.
Now, you repaid, I guess, a total of about $32 billion has been repaid to the federal government, 23 from the IPO and some earlier. How much money does the government have to get back to be break even, and what stock price would they have to sell the remaining shares in order to, quote, break even?
Well, they owned 61% of the company before. They owned 33%. On a basic basis, on a fully diluted, they own 27. I just happen to know these numbers. Right. So they own a third of the company, so 500 million shares at about $33 a share, multiply 500 times 33. That's what they need to get out to break. That'll mean that somewhere in the high 40s, low 50s. The previous break even was around $41, $42 a share, I think. We sold for 33, and that's about where it is today.
So do you give any advice to the government about when they should sell the remaining shares? And does the government give you any advice about how to operate the company?
No and no. It's a very clear and bright line, and the administration has been great about this. They don't involve themselves in the boardroom or the management or the operation of the company. We had a shareholder meeting this summer. It was funny. There were 4 people there. The U.S. government, the Canadian government, the Health Trust for the Union, and Motors Liquidation Corporation representing the bondholders in large measure. If they don't like what the board's doing, they would remove them, or parts of them. It's not our business, not our call. If you had 1 million shares, and only David would have 1 million shares of a particular stock. If your financial advisor, you said you wanted to sell, you wouldn't want the advisor saying, well, I'll tell you when you're going to sell and how much you're going to sell. It's not our role to tell the federal government anything. They're an owner, and they determined how much they wanted to sell and when they want to sell it.
But they still can determine pay salaries and so forth at General Motors. Is that still appropriate?
Is that that's still true?
All right. So we go on to the next question.
Well, you know, in fact, I'm visiting with the special paymaster this afternoon, and not about me. I mean, we have to be competitive, and we have to be able to attract and retain great people. And we've been able to do that, but I think it's largely out of a commitment, which may sound strange. Money isn't everything. We've been able to attract pretty damn good people, in my opinion, and we've been able to retain people where we're starting to lose them now. And I think that's an issue for our owners to recognize that in their best interest, we should get some relaxation.
Now, when you were asked to join the General Motors board, you were a member of the board before you became the CEO. One, did the government know that you were a Republican? Did they care? And secondly, what impressions did you take away from the General Motors company when you joined the board? What was the biggest shock that you found when you joined the board?
Did you plant this, David? Well, I would describe myself, and I say this with some pride, as a Colin Powell Republican.
Aren't many of them left, I guess.
Well, there are at least 2, and it sounds like there are more. Yes, they did. Well, you have to, I know John McCain. He happened to go to the Naval Academy, and I consider him a friend, so I supported him, yes. I've supported Democrats as well. I like to think that people that are right-thinking, not right of center, but right-thinking should be in our Congress and in our political community. So I don't think that made a difference to him.
When you joined the board, what were your biggest impressions of the company? When you joined, you had not been on their board before and weren't that familiar with the company. What was the biggest surprise or shock that you had?
On the board?
When you joined the board?
Well, I think that too often too many things were done intuitively. And where Carlisle, you do, I thought, insightful, probing financial analyses. There was one report a couple of us got upset when they brought up the request forward. I mean, the numbers we're talking about here are really large. I mean, we do $10 and $12 billion in sales a month. Our capital budgets are huge, and the development of a new eco engine was in excess of $1 billion, and it was basically, we need it. And as you know, and most of you in business would say, well, do you make it or do you buy it? Can I get it from somewhere else? Little known fact, how many of you all drive BMWs? That car with that great engineering. Well, you'll be pleased to know that GM makes your transmission. That German engineering is made in Detroit. But do you have to make everything? And that was kind of anathema to the GM culture. It's the GM way. And culturally, I would say that has to change over time. Sooner the better, but it won't probably be overnight.
How are your labor costs now? Are they roughly the same as BMW or Toyota in the United States? When you produce a car now, are your labor per hourly costs roughly the same?
Yes, they are the same.
Okay. Now, some of your predecessors, Rick Wagner, Fritz Henderson, have you talked with them about what mistakes they think they might have made or what advice they would give to you? And what have you done to kind of get some of the institutional memory?
Well, yes, I have. I thought they're all fine gentlemen, and I don't know if I was criticized as much as it was observed. I'm not a car guy. In some respects, I think maybe a fresh perspective and someone who's been in other industries, seen other issues, and as you know, we used to look at a lot of turnarounds and recapitalizations. So I'm not sure I was totally witless, but I think institutional knowledge is important. I still meet with a subset of the prior management on a routine basis just to see. I want to know what others think. I don't necessarily have to accept it, but I want to know what outside informed auto executives, tenured auto executives, think about what we're doing. And some of it's very insightful for me, but the more points of view I get, I think the better able I make to make better decisions. So yes, I've gone to their homes. Okay. I've played Jeopardy with them on occasion, not literally, but from an auto perspective. And I think I've been the beneficiary of their knowledge.
Today, what would you say your 2 or 3 biggest challenges are as the CEO of General Motors? What do you stay up at night worrying about the most?
Well, as I tell everybody, I worry about everything. And it was funny when I was on the floor of the, we just ran like dogs for weeks. And one of these reporters told me I looked like hell. I said, thanks. That was just before the camera went on. That was it. Then I saw him in Detroit when we rolled out the Volt, and he says, you look better, but you don't look that great. My wife told me I did, though. And, well, I worry about the culture. I worry about our cost position going forward. For example, and I think management has to have integrity. And I don't mean that we don't have integrity, but for example, I just put out a memo to all of North America. There'll be no salary increases this year. We are going to put a small contingency to the side so if we see issues where we're not competitive, we can address it. Because the structural cost of a 2 or 3% increase, after 5 years I got 15% structural cost increase. I can't have that in a company that's in a very cyclical industry. I mean, it's unbelievable how predictably cyclical this industry is over the last 100 years. About every 3 to 5, 7 years, up, down, up, down. And going back to the Carlyle days, I see the great Carlyle investors here. Before the Great Recession, we actually intellectualized and said, let's buy more defensive industries that will be impacted, but not as severely. And in an up market, you look for cyclical companies. And this is a cyclical company, and I don't get the opportunity to be a portfolio manager anymore. We're betting on a cyclical industry. That's why I want a zero debt balance sheet. So we can invest without canceling and getting a ratcheting in our capital programs. So we had $26 billion in debt before the bankruptcy. We have less than $4 billion in debt today. We had a $26 billion pension liability when I came in. It's $10 billion today. We have $28 billion of cash on the balance sheet, and we are looking at that unfunded pension liability now. But we have to have a robust fortress balance sheet. That sounds funny. I mean, people look at me like I'm from Mars now, coming from a private equity firm where we typically bought predictable cash flows, again, predictable cash flows, and had debt, and we would pay the debt down. This is a different game. We're playing football, not rugby. It's kind of the same thing, but it's different. And you have to shape the business model and intellectualize the problem much more than maybe it was done before. So if you look across this cost structure, and structural costs will kill you. We're going to have incentive pay, variable pay for management in the near term. And so when I meet with the union every 4 to 6 weeks, I know that may sound strange to some of my former business friends. I actually had the head of the UAW and the head of the GM vice president on the balcony at the IPO. I've invited them to board dinners. I've invited them to that employee meeting I referenced before and had them introduced. They are our business partners. I don't want a contentious relationship with the union. I want them to be our business partner. So I've broached in these meetings I have with them that they have to, because you heard a lot of noise in the public forum about, aren't you guys going to go back hard at management? Aren't you going to get every dime back that you had to give up in the bankruptcy? And their prosperity is tied to the company's prosperity. They happen to have a representative between me and the average employee. But I've tried to breach that. And I mean, I go to a plant a month, and I'll tell you, it's so invigorating and affirming to walk through the plant and people yelling at you, "Hey, Dan!" I mean, because you can't be trusted without giving trust, and you can't have credibility. Because the immediate response was, "Well, I want you guys to think about this." He says, "I've heard that from CEOs of GM, and then they go and give management a 3 to 5% raise." So I put it out on our website that essentially there are no increases in base pay this year. And because I don't think we can do that if we don't lead by example. So you have to have, the culture issue isn't some amorphous thing. It's about me. It's about the management team. It's about our relationship with the union. Can we be trusted? I think we've got to invest. When I talk about product, are we going to have the right products? What do we want to be? What do we want to be remembered? I mean, of course, I'm probably a little thin-skinned having worked in private equity. I'm not as tough as I used to be. I know some of you out there I used to work with probably don't believe that. But I mean, I don't like, it was important that we have credibility in what we do. And it extends into our products. So what do we want to be remembered as? And for example, when I look back to the dumb things that management did coming out of post-World War II, we had an oligopoly. We had 50%. In fact, people bitch about complain about government involvement in General Motors. In 1960, they were talking, well, they have too much market share, we ought to break them up. Well, were they involved in the company then? Of course they were. So now they're just involved in the company from another perspective. But how do we want the company to be remembered? So when you go back and you look at 1960, and they were giving away post-retirement health care, which was just corrosive to the cost structure, the structural cost of the company. And they gave these job banks in perpetuity. It was such a burden on the company that made us non-competitive. And you say, well, who did that? Well, they did it because there was no competition after the war out of Europe, because it was bombed out, and so was Asia. We were roaming the globe on a trade perspective, and these guys just wanted to buy piece. So Ford would agree with the labor contract that GM or Chrysler negotiated, because as long as they didn't get competitive advantage. So they underestimated foreign competition, foreign quality, and they were arrogant. So, I mean, I've had people come to me and say, well, what about a labor agreement till 2020, 2025? I don't want to burden my successor with that type of decision.
When you're your successor, you're not leaving, I know, but you're committed to do this for 5 years or so, would you say?
Yeah. But I mean, the reason I wanted, this is a criticism, thin-skinned, I guess. Why did I want the Chinese in this investment? Because if someone looks back in 2050 to 2010 and says, who was a fool running the place then? And I passed an opportunity not only to have a leading market share and a dynamic position in China, but I also tied up with the #1 manufacturer in China from an economics point of view. And I've been to China, I've met with the senior management of the Shanghai Auto. This is a great partnership, and I think to be tied, and we went in with them 50-50 into India. This is 1 in 3 people on the earth live in 2 countries, India and China. We would be fools to pass this up. And so instead of making and committing the company to, I think, a bad strategy is to, you know, so they put $500 million into us. I know it sounds like a lot of money, but it's not that much in the grand scheme of things. That I want that tie into China, I want that tie into Asia, and I think in some respects it wouldn't be all bad if we were considered Global Motors and not General Motors.
Well, if, what percentage of your stock you think is held by people outside the United States now?
About 8%. 8 to 10, yeah.
And today, your market share in the United States is roughly what?
Well, this is good news. Last year, we were, at this time, we were 17.5. I think we're up to 19.
19, and then your market share in China is what?
Almost 13, 14%.
But that 13% is almost as many cars as you're selling
Right.
in the United States.
Yeah,
right?
we'll make as many cars in China well, almost as many in China as we do in the United States. It's been a dramatic.
Has anybody from the government called to thank you for getting $23 billion back in the coffers of the Treasury?
Well, remember, not all of it went to the federal government. The Canadians got a little bit. I'm not being that they own a reasonably small amount, but yes.
Okay. Were they effusive or just polite?
You know, David, I thought you were more effusive here today
Right,
than you ever were when I was at Carlisle. So I suppose when I'm gone, they might be effusive, but they aren't now.
So
I got a job to do, and not to be.
Okay. Well, let me ask you one last question before we have a couple from the audience. What was the best advice that somebody gave you when you became the CEO? Did somebody, a business colleague or somebody, give you some advice? What was the best advice you got?
Probably not to take myself too seriously. This job, if you, I mean, look at this. If I had showed up here last year, probably would have filled that table. It is overwhelming, the public exposure you get in this position. I was surprised at that. And I think it is. Don't take yourself too seriously.
Okay, we have time for some questions right here. One. Speak up. If you don't have a mic, just speak up loudly.
It used to be a status symbol to drive a GM car, not a German car. So listening to you, I hope that those days will come back again, and driving a GM car will make us all proud outside the US. But my question for you is, about 6 months ago at All Things D, the CEO of Ford talked about the sync and how they're introducing all this new technology to help the driver in the car. Do you think that that's a differentiator, or is it really building a solid car at a good cost structure?
I think first and foremost, you have to deliver core value in the basic value proposition. Good car, it's reliable, it's got great quality, and it's durable. And that's why we've made huge progress. The average residual, what is the car worth after 3 and 5 years at GM, has increased anywhere from $5 to $9 500 to 900 basis points in the last year. So we're comparable with our competition. So get to your 1970s Lebanon story. We will get there. Now we have to show that we're consistent. I mean, you know, you can't be good 1 year or 2 years. You got to do it over 5 or 10 or 15 years. As it relates, OnStar, when I got there, and it hasn't morphed yet, but I just hired a Nextel, one of the senior Nextel people to go into OnStar. It was kind of a safety and security. As I described, I went down, the people were crushed. I went down there and I says, this is, I've fallen and I can't get up. Automotive's equivalent. I says, we've got so much potential. Sync is contained within the car. There's no external updates. I mean, believe it or not, if you're driving a GM car with OnStar on it, I can tell what your oil pressure is, your transmission fluid, your air in your car, your tires. I had a Mercedes before I took this job, and I always got a low tire. They wouldn't tell me what tire it was. So I pull up and I got to fill all 4 of them up and get out there, and it was cold. Boy, by the way, isn't it warm here? I got up this morning, it was 32 degrees. I got up yesterday morning to Detroit, it was 11. A little aside. But what we're going to do with OnStar, and you saw it, social media, we just loaded into it. We don't want to create bad habits with distracted driving. I just met with the Secretary of Transportation last week on this subject. So we're going to, you'll be able, texting, it'll be digitized and downloaded to you. For every GM car, you have a unique phone number attached to it. I didn't know that before I was at GM. So if your spouse or someone is running errands and you say, well, how can I get a hold of her? And she never turns on her cell phone card. I could call a car and it would download to her. I could text her, it would verbalize to her. And then I don't want her texting. So we're going to try to conform 4 or 5 basic questions so she can say yes, no, or he can say yes, no, I can't talk now, I'll call you later. So we're working on that. We're working with consumer groups, or focus groups, so we can bring, without distracting. That right now, for example, we were driving out to Annapolis and it was, what restaurant do we go to? Well, as you know, if you have a GPS, you can't, while the car's moving, you can't punch it in for safety reasons. Well, all you got to do is hit your OnStar button, say, I want to go to such and such restaurant in Annapolis, and she'll say, I'll download it to you. And it's down there right like that. This is going to, that interactivity with a database outside the automobile is going to be a distinction and a differentiator versus sync. And I think people will look at our cars are generally all 5-star rated from a safety perspective. We're going to start talking about safety because I don't want to say quality is a commodity, but quality in terms of the way we do supply chain all around the world. We've gone to global architectures and global platforms. So a car that we build in Germany or we build in China or we build in the United States is basically off the same supply chain. So we test like no one's ever, and so do our competitors. So the quality of cars has risen dramatically. So how do I differentiate? Styling. I mean, I think I take an active interest in all of our commercials, and some of them you've seen. I look at every one of them. I want to look at every design of every car. There are certain things a CEO should do, and there are certain things you should stay the hell out of. But safety and telematics are differentiators in my mind, and I think we should...
Dan, in advertising, you mentioned that your predecessor was on TV all the time with ads.
Yeah.
Are we going to see you on TV with any ads, or you're not sure yet?
No, they'll never see me on television. But I'll tell you, going to something I said before, I want to have a hand in them. And I don't know how many over Thanksgiving you saw the falling down ad. Did anybody see those ads? We all fall down. You know, that was a big risk for us because it just reinforced the bankruptcy. But you know, everybody has troubles in their life. We had trouble as a company, as a family. And to say we made mistakes, we failed, and that we appreciated it, and we wanted to say thank you. I got letters and emails and says, you know, I like this, you're humble. And we should be humble. We did fail. But you said thank you. Why didn't the bank say thank you? Why didn't AIG, who got 150 billion, say thank you? And just a thank you. And that ad could only run for a week, the 1 week after the IPO. And we can't do it again. So, no, I'll not be, but I am going to be very involved, very interested in how we present ourselves.
Time for another question. Anybody else? One more, last question.
Thank you. A question about corporate culture. GM for years was known the GM way, or something apparently I think you're saying now wasn't so good. You knew for a long time you had more brands than you could sustain. You had safety, you had quality issues. Was the near-death experience of bankruptcy enough to shake up the corporate culture at the mid-level manager issue and to get over some of the issues you think you need to?
I doubt it. I talked to all the employees and I said the good news, we were in bankruptcy 39 days. I don't think we did irreparable damage to the brands. The bad news, we were in bankruptcy only 39 days, and I will say this, there is an element in a segment of the population that views it as a bad storm that passed. And so we have to change. For example, we went from 4 to 8 models. I like this. I keep, you'd love this in my office, I keep the front page, the cover of Fortune magazine from the mid-'80s, and they had Oldsmobile, Pontiac, Chevrolet, and Buick, and they were exactly the same. I meet routinely with the head of Cadillac, GMC, Buick, and Chevrolet, because I want brand identity, I want brand attributes, I want brand equity. And now what we have, what I call swim lanes. So when your cars look exactly the same, and my dad we always had GM cars. And when we were not doing so well, we had Pontiacs and things went better. We got an Oldsmobile, and then you went to Buick, and you said, what the hell? And I always wondered, well, what's the difference? It's a GM car. GM is not a brand. It's a holding company. Chevrolet's a brand. Buick's a brand. GMC's a brand. Cadillac's a brand. So now we have these swim lanes that are broad enough that we can talk about brand attributes associated with styling, exciting, youth, reliable, value. That's the Chevy. Understated elegance is the Buick, and I want the Buick to flank the premium brand. So we have clear, before they were too closely bunched. And we have to really intellectualize the marketing. And then, I mean, getting to your point, you say, well, I said, how many engine types do we have? We have 18 engine types. 18 engine types. And maybe I'm not a car guy, but I was an engineer once. And you say, well, what's the difference? What's the difference between a 1.4 and a 1.5 liter engine? Because a guy says 1/10 of a liter. And I say, yeah, I know, but why do we have a team dedicated to 1.4 and 1.5? And then we have what are called variants, whether it's turbo, gas, diesel. So I have a 1.4 in gas, diesel, turbo, and you go, my God, we've made it too complex. So we now have a plan to go from 18 down to 8 or 9. And we had a plan, I shouldn't say all this, I know there are reporters in the crowd. You know, what do we do if oil goes to $100 a barrel? What do? We weren't ready, or $200 a barrel. The last time oil went to $140 a barrel, we were largely SUV, crossover driven, and we didn't. Now we've got what we call a T300, which you'll see out, which is going to be another great small car. You've got the Cruise, which is, I think, going to be a grand slam home run, and we're going to come up with the Eco engine on that. And you've got the Volt, and the lineup is pretty impressive over the next couple of years. So you say to yourself, well, what do we do? Well, right now, we've got to start. It takes years to turn this ship around. And you say, well, what do we do if it's 120 next year? That's the question before the executive committee. I obviously have a strong point of view on that, and I don't want to influence it as an outcome. But as a team, I'm trying to get people to come to the right conclusion. And I think we do have a plan that's not final form, but it's getting pretty firm on how do we reposition the company for good times, mid-cycle, upcycle. But what if we have an upcycle and oil goes to $120 or $30 a barrel? What do we do? And it's going to boil down to not so much design and style, the top hat, as I call it, of the car, but how do we drive the propulsion systems? Propulsion is a key investment. We're spending billions of dollars. We have hydrogen cars that are really cool. I mean, I'm a real pain in the rear sometimes. I says, well, if it's that clean, let me put my face down by the muffler, by the exhaust. And I did. You know, the guy's looking at me like, oh, good. And so I'm down there, and it's water. It's just water coming out. I mean, but the car costs $500,000 because in the chemistry of the engine, you got a lot of platinum. Well, platinum's like, it's more expensive than gold. And so the actual chemistry has to be worked out before we can develop these new propulsion systems. But electrification of the car is critical, and I talked about extended range electric vehicle, the battery electric vehicles, we've got plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. We're going to have a family of them, and we want them in every one of our models. We don't want the Cadillac to be left. We're going to have electrification. For example, the Buick LaCrosse, which is, I think, the finest automobile for its money. We're killing Lexus. We're killing Acura on these things. And you say to yourself, we get 26 miles the gallon on the road. Well, that's okay today, so we're going to put what's called a BAS Plus, a battery alternator starter on it. It'll jump it to 36 miles a gallon. Gee whiz, a mid-size sedan making that kind of mileage is good, but it's not good enough because the government's looking at 60+ miles per gallon in 2025. How do we achieve that across the portfolio? So I mean, you can't. Bill McGowan, who was the founder of MCI, was one of the biggest men in my life and a great mentor for me. But I mean, he told me when he made me president of MCI, he says, Dan, don't try to look into the future. Imagine yourself 5 years, and where do you want this company to be, and how do I get there? Well, this company takes so much investment and development is in 3 and 4 and 5 year increments. I can't think out 5 years. You got to look out, well, what are we going to do in 2025? Because if some of the prior management had thought out 20 years and 25 years, I don't think they would have made the decisions they made in 1960 that really, in a sense, sealed the fate of my immediate predecessors. They were good guys, capable, smart, and they were the victims of structural costs that were engaged or committed to in the 60s and 70s.
Dan, I hope it was water coming out of the exhaust pipe. And I wanted to thank you on behalf of the Economic Club of Washington for a terrific presentation. It's clear why you took the job. Let me give you a gift. Hold on. It's a map of the District of Columbia. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you.
Okay? Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Great job. Great. Thanks a lot.